Sometimes it's a little like riding a bucking bronco when you're trying to take firewood and create art. So let's dive right into the process. Here we're starting with a rough bowl blank. You can see the bark facing the camera, which will ultimately end up being the bottom of the bowl. And all we've really done up to this point, besides slicing the log with a chainsaw, is get it in a rough circular shape at the bandsaw before we mounted it to the lathe. Now in this case I have the blank mounted to the lathe using a faceplate, and that's just my personal preference at this point for rough turning, where we're going to be hollowing out the inside of the bowl. I usually prefer a faceplate. Rough turning a bowl at this stage is always one of those tests of patience. It doesn't feel like you're ever going to get to round, which is really all we're shooting for here. We just want to get the bowl round. You can see the lathe is turning pretty slow. It's down about 325 RPMs or so, and you can still see the lathe bouncing around. You can see the tailstock here wobbling around a little bit, but I've got the lathe turned down pretty slow at this point. I tested it before off camera here at a higher speed, and the lathe was kind of walking across the shop, so I turned it down a little bit, and now we're just trying to get that outside edge as round as we can. You'll notice a couple things in this shot. First off, on my left hand, I am wearing a glove. That's not always advisable, but I tend to do it with rough turning. That is a pretty tight glove that latches around my wrist, and for me it's more of a comfort thing. I guess it's sort of balancing the risk of getting the glove caught in the workpiece versus just the shards and bark and everything coming off, which is not real comfortable on a bare hand, and the heat that you end up with on the tool. So it's sort of balancing that safety aspect from both perspectives. Since this rough turning can really kind of pound on your body a little bit, one thing that you'll notice here is my right hand is kind of anchored down near my hip. I have the tool handle itself kind of down low right on my hip, and I'm using my body to absorb as much of that impact coming around as I can. It's not just my hands, it's not just my arms. I'm trying to use my whole body here as much as possible. So let's speed this along a little bit. Here you can see on the outside, that outside diameter of the bowl is pretty round, and we're mostly in shape. We're starting to work around to the bottom side of the bowl, where we're going to start forming a tenon. With that tenon, we'll be able to use a 4-jaw chuck and reverse the bowl around for hollowing it out. So here we're just trying to get all the remaining bark off the bottom side of the bowl and start forming the tenon. With the tailstock out of the way, now we have easy access to the bottom of the bowl. Now we can finally kind of get it all flat, keep working towards that tenon. I like to start kind of flattening the bottom here, because ultimately we're going to use that tenon to form the foot of the bowl when we're all finished. So I do like to start with a flat surface. It just makes sure we get the tenon seated in the chuck well, and it also kind of gives us good reference points, so later when we're forming the foot of the bowl at the very last step, we've got a nice flat surface to work from. Here my shoulder's in the way, but I'm using a ruler to measure and mark the diameter for the tenon as we're kind of getting that finalized. So I'm just kind of giving a quick spin here with my hand to make a mark all the way around, and we'll use that mark to size the tenon. In addition to the tenon, we want a nice flat shoulder just outside that tenon, which will give the jaws a nice flat surface to mate up against and reference against. That'll keep the bowl from wobbling on the chuck jaws. Once those 2 points are established, all we really want to do is keep pulling around that corner to create a nice smooth flowing arc from the bottom of the bowl to the rim of the bowl. Here I've switched tools to my skew chisel. I'm going to use this to clean up the bottom of the shoulder and also put a bevel, kind of a dovetail, underneath the rim of that tenon. That'll just kind of help lock that tenon into the four-jaw chuck. Now we finally got the speed on the lathe kicked up a little bit, so we can make some nice smooth passes. These couple passes here, we're just kind of refining that outside shape on the bowl and also trying to get as clean of cuts as we can, just to help minimize sanding when we're getting ready to finish the bowl. I've had a lot more success with the shear scraping motion on the bottom of this bowl. Part of that is just with the bark that's on the outside, on the exterior of the bowl, but it's just worked much better for me. So that's what I'm doing here, is just kind of the last little refinement of the curve on the bottom of the bowl. My last step on the exterior of the bowl is to use my negative rake scraper just to clean off tool marks and try to get a nice smooth surface, and hopefully this will help reduce some of the sanding as we're preparing to finish the bowl. With the bowl turned around, it's time to start working on the inside of the bowl. All I'm working on here is trying to get this initial face just kind of flat and smooth, which will help the bowl blank run just a little bit smoother on the lathe, and it may help us speed up the lathe for more efficient cutting as we go along. After turning the bowl around and getting that front face nice and flat and smooth, in really inspecting the bowl blank at this point, I realized there's a design opportunity here to kind of make a different shaped bowl. So what you can see here is sort of the beginning of that process. So I've switched to a cutter tool to go back and work the exterior of the bowl and kind of reshape it. So currently we're just a little over 11 inches in diameter at that widest point, and we've got several inches there at the top of the bowl that are really just kind of flat. So we're going to take this opportunity to go from that widest point right after we sweep with a natural flowing curve off the bottom of the bowl out to that widest point. What we're going to do is taper back in toward the center and create a closed rim bowl or form. Normally I wouldn't be doing this much work on the exterior of a bowl after I've got it turned around and really ready to hollow the middle. So I'm using a high-speed steel cutter tool, kind of a carbide insert type tool, just to shape that outside. The headstock of the lathe is kind of in the way to use a gouge to do this shaping, but this tool works pretty well, and I really don't want to take off a lot of material either. With the exterior pretty smooth now, I want to start addressing some of the cracks in the bowl just so we can keep this from blowing apart as we keep hollowing the center. So at this point I'm using a 1 pound cut of shellac as a sanding sealer, and I like to apply this first before I start using CA glue, and that just keeps the glue from absorbing so deeply into the bowl around those cracks and voids, and it helps prevent discoloring around those cracks when we're finishing the bowl. With the shellac dry, start using the CA glue, which is basically just super glue. This is a medium thick Starbond CA glue. So I just kind of outline the cracks, try to let it absorb, kind of soak into those cracks as much as possible. And I will hit it with some accelerator to help it, speed up the drying process as well. With the cracks kind of initially sealed up, it's time to start working on the inside of the bowl and just kind of going through our typical hollowing process. I will do the bulk of the hollowing with my 5/8 inch bowl gouge. With some initial hollowing done, we're going to work back to the exterior and start creating that closed rim effect on this bowl. So if we jump ahead just a little bit, here we're just putting the final touches on the outside shape of the bowl. And once we've got this refined, we'll be ready to go back to the inside of the bowl and really hog out the interior. With the shape of the bowl now fully finalized, we're going to go back to some of these knot holes and imperfections on the outside of the bowl and kind of fill those in with CA glue. Here I'm using a medium thick black tinted CA glue that's just going to kind of fill in and blend with that knot hole that's already there. We've got several spots on this bowl that we're going to do this with, and at this point we're going to kind of take care of all those things, let it dry, and then we'll start hollowing the middle of the bowl. With the glue dry, we've broke out the negative rake scraper just to kind of clean up the glue on the outside of the bowl and just kind of give us that final smoothing and really kind of start the finishing process on the outside of the bowl. This should also save us a little time and effort in sanding. So I've got the bowl gouge again, and now it's time just to hollow out and do a lot of the rough hollowing here in the center of the bowl. During this video, we're hitting a lot of different steps in the process, using a lot of different tools, but we're really not going into much detail, and that's really done trying to keep the video somewhat concise. So if there's part of the process or a tool that you'd like to see more detail on, please leave a comment in the comments section. We check all of those. We'd love to answer those questions in the comments, or maybe more importantly, do another video just kind of focused on those details. So we're just skipping along a little bit, just showing progress as we keep moving along with the bowl gouge. So I like to use a bowl gouge with swept back wings, kind of a fingernail type grind. This one has a 50-degree angle at the nose, at the cutting edge, which I find helpful for most things, but it is not the most effective across the bottom of a bowl. So we will be switching tools here shortly as we get a little deeper and deeper in this bowl. This gouge is going to get less effective. You can kind of catch the profile here really quickly of this large, I call it a bowl scraper, but this is the tool I like to use to kind of finish hollowing where my bowl gouge really won't get to very effectively, and it gets me down into the bottom of the bowl. So the scraper's ground where it's arced or curved on the end, and that sweeps back down that left-hand side a couple of inches. That allows you to get along the bottom of the bowl and transition right into the side of the bowl, all in one sweeping motion, which kind of creates a nice smooth cut along the bottom and side of the bowl. So my body's blocking most of the view here, but I'm basically straddling the bed of the lathe, kind of like I'm riding a horse, just to get my body in position to kind of finish hollowing and get up the sides of this bowl. With this unique shape, I just had to put myself in a different position than I would normally take, but I'm just using that scraper to kind of refine and finish the inside of that bowl. Now it's time for everyone's favorite part, which is sanding. So I like to use an air-powered die grinder, and I've got a kind of quick connect fitting in this little grinder that allows me to very quickly kind of change grits. So I very, very quickly get from 80 grit all the way to 320, both on the inside and outside. You can also see here I try to run the lathe in reverse. I've got a little box there connected to the vacuum where I'm trying to capture as much dust, but you can see on my shoulders I didn't have much success capturing dust in this project. Once all the sanding's done, the last step really with the turning process is to remount the bowl so I can work on the bottom, turn away the tenon, and create a foot for the bowl to sit on. The big reason I try to make the tenon as wide as I possibly can is to give me the material here in this step to create a nice flat foot on the bottom of the bowl so it's nice and sturdy. So here we're just kind of trimming down the tenon, creating the foot, and then just kind of blending away that shoulder into the rest of the body of the bowl. Then it's back to the die grinder to work back through the grits on the bottom and foot of the bowl. Here you can see we were finishing a whole batch of pieces all at one time. And here in this first step, really just taking a heavier cut of shellac. So this is about a 3-pound cut. And I'm coating the bowl inside and out with the shellac. We like to use this step to bring out the natural color and beauty of the wood. It just kind of gives you that oil-based amber type look and feel, but the shellac dries very quickly, and it's very easy to take our next step, which is applying a urethane top coat. Now it's time to spray the finish. I'm using General Finishes High Performance, which is basically a water-based urethane top coat. I like to use it because I can spray it on in my basement with reasonable ventilation going. But I found this finish dries fast enough that I can build multiple coats. So I end up putting about 5 coats both inside and outside the bowls, and it's a very fast process.